Thank you for joining us for another episode of the More Right Rudder podcast, the podcast for flight instructors on the go. My name is Sarah Stout. I'm the Program Development Manager here at NAFI, the National Association of Flight Instructors. Before we jump into today's main episode, we'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsor, Sporties. Sporties is a very generous and longtime sponsor of NAFI. We thank them for their support, and as part of that sponsorship, you, as the members, get a discount code to a wide variety of Sporties training products available on their website. To access that discount, log on to the NAFI website, nafinet.org, and head over to the membership discount page to find the link and code. Again, thank you to Sporties for sponsoring today's episode. And as a reminder, listeners to the More Right Rudder podcast can get a $10 discount off their NAFI membership, whether you're a new member joining for the first time or a renewing member. Use the code POD49, POD49 at checkout when you renew online at nafinet, nafinet.org.
Podcast. I'm Beth Stanton, NAFI's Director of Publications and Editor. This is The Writers Behind the Stories, a series where we meet some of the authors who write for Mentor magazine. Today's guest is Samantha Bowyer. Sam is a flight instructor and associate professor of aeronautical science at Embry-Riddle in Daytona Beach. Sam was a critical contributor to the success of the inaugural NAFI Summit held in October last year. She offered crucial assistance organizing the event. She understood the mission and dedicated her time and resources to ensure that NAFI Summit had its best opportunity for success. Sam is the recipient of the 2024 Jack J. Eggspuehler Service Award, NAFI's highest honor, which recognizes individuals who have performed outstanding service to NAFI. Sam, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Well, I'm super excited to have you here for lots of reasons. So, as we just said, in addition to Sam being an author for Mentor, she's also the recent recipient. She just received her award this year at AirVenture. She wasn't there in person, but she received it that year. So I just want to talk, this podcast series is all about sort of the magic of how Mentor happens. And I think how Sam got to be sitting here talking with us today is kind of an interesting story. And I like to talk about a little bit of connecting the dots backwards, because of course Sam is here and of course she won the award. And of course she's wrote for these two issues of Mentor. But the way Sam got here is I reached out to a colleague and friend of mine named Carolina Anderson, who is also a colleague of Sam's at Embry-Riddle. And this was when I first became editor a couple years ago, and I started reaching out to all my CFI friends to twist their arms to write for Mentor. And Carolyn did write an article on slips and skids that appeared last year in Mentor. And then she said, hey, you should really talk to my colleague and friend, Sam. And so that's how I got connected with Sam. And we are so lucky, Sam, that
That's really sweet of you.
Entered into the NAFI universe. So tell us a little bit about when Carolina reached out to you. You're a busy lady. You got a lot going on.
So that's funny. Yeah, Carolina's office is just through that wall. So she and I have become pretty good friends, really good friends over the last couple of years, especially. But she had mentioned it. She's like, I know this wonderful lady, Beth. She just became the new editor at NAFI Mentor. She's like, I know you used to be a member, and I know you love writing about things that are flight instruction related. What do you think about writing an article? And I was like, I've never written an article like that. Like, what would I write about? And so she connected you and I together. We kind of brainstormed. I remember we came up with 2 or 3 ideas, and one of them just spoke to me, and it was a theme that I was kind of seeing that I was having to have with my students quite a bit, um with the dare to be wrong. Like, I was seeing this kind of just incessant desire to always have to be perfect, to always have to be right. And I was like, you know what? I think our new flight instructors potentially need to be reminded that they're human and that they can make mistakes. And some of our more seasoned flight instructors, myself included, need reminded that we're human and we can make mistakes, even if this is a career that we've been doing for a long time. And that taking risks is important, and doing things a little bit differently is important, and that change is good and a learning curve. And so I that message just was in me, and you gave me an outlet to let it come out. And so um yeah, that was kind of how it all started. Um and then that kind of wrapped me into NAFI Summit. Do you want me to continue about how that happened?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so it was funny because you asked for a quick bio. Again, first time I'd ever been published in a magazine. I was more used to academic writing, or curriculum writing, even before that. And I um, I happen to be a project management professional in addition to my flight instruction background. And I included that because it was a hard test and I'm proud of it. And it's something I really enjoy doing, is working on projects and managing that. So it was included in my bio, and I happened to get a call from Karen Kalishek. And she's like, "Hey, I know you don't know me, but I'm the board chair for NAFI, and I just read your article in the magazine, and I see that you're a project manager." And I'm like, "This is gonna be a very weird phone call." Yes, yes, I am. And she's like, "Well, we're talking about maybe hosting a conference for flight instructors." And I peeked up and I was like, "Yes, we need that so badly." Um, I was like, "What can I do to help?" And she's like, "Well," and she kind of talked about what the needs were with like logistics and managing some things. Um, and they had somebody else who was helping, and he was great. But he had some health issues, and I ended up kind of getting involved in the team on a volunteer part-time thing. Um, and then somehow took over. So, um, but I mean, and I took over from a documenting and logistical standpoint. I mean, Paul and Karen were still very, very much at the helm and taking on much of the legwork. Um, I just kind of kept track of a lot of it and managed it well, which was a lot of fun.
Well, oh my gosh. I didn't know that Karen story. I,
Oh, really?
I did not know that that's how you got roped in, and I love it. So, a couple of things, Sam, as you're sitting here talking, we'll talk about the summit thing first, and I want to circle back to your Dare to Be Wrong article.
Okay.
One of the things that I found in life where it gets the most interesting is when we show up and then when we say yes.
Yeah.
That's when stuff starts really unfolding in ways we could have never anticipated. So, for example, when Carolina knocks on your office door and says, "Hey, you want to write for this CFI magazine?" You said yes. And then, you just happen to have, in your bio about your management of event
Project management background. Yep.
project, sorry, that project management, which was also an event, this was. And then Karen, ding, 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 because okay, so you put yourself out there, right? You said yes. So once you like step up, you put yourself out there in the world
Yeah.
for somebody to read your bio, for somebody to say, "Oh, this lady might be able to help us." And then she reaches out and you said yes again. And then it unfolds and unfolds and unfolds in ways that you never could have imagined.
Right.
So I just love when people do that. And for Sam's first article that she wrote, and actually, Sam, I was looking for, in preparation for this interview, I was realizing it was the July 2022, which was my inaugural debut issue.
It was.
And so this is the Oshkosh issue. And then she was also, your latest article was in this July of 2024. So it's like, I'm like, it's been 2 years. My
I
God.
know. I know. I thought about that too. I looked at them too and I was like, oh, it's really been a while. I should probably write more.
Well, you've been kind of helping out in some other ways, so don't
Yeah.
get off your back there. But your Sam, the full article of Sam's full title of Sam's article is called "Dare to Be Wrong: A Letter to My CFI Self," and I'm just getting chills as I said the title. What I love so much about Sam's article, or in articles like this in particular, is I call them vulnerability articles. And you even talked about that in your description of why you decided you wanted to write about this, because so often we want to project, the master of the universe persona, especially CFIs. We have like this ego thing and this confidence thing and this, I know how to do things right, because guess what? People who are flying with you in an airplane, they want to kind of know, what you're doing. So for us to admit that to ourselves, let alone out loud to our colleagues and our students, there's an element of fear in admitting this thing. So I think it's so powerful, because when you write this type of thing, when you have this conversation, it opens up a door of permission for others to acknowledge it too.
Yeah. And that's kind of what I seek for. I mean, I work with students. I teach at Riddle. The primary course that I'm teaching right now is instrument pilot operations. And a lot of them, are 18, 19-year-old students. And I joke that, and it's only somewhat of a joke, but you get that green piece of plastic and it's happens to be an ego amplifier. And I'll joke that, I have 30 kids in a class and I'll be like, it's amazing all of our egos fit in here. And it's true, like that's absolutely correct. We have this confidence, but that confidence, in my opinion, shouldn't get rid of or replace or not create space for asking questions, for realizing that you're not perfect. You can be very confident in who you are as a pilot, who you are as a flight instructor, who you are as an educator, who you are as a person, and still realize that there's holes in your knowledge area or holes in your experience, and you're going to continue to grow. I mean, a good educator is always seeking to learn new things, and that's truthful of flight instructors. And I think sometimes, yeah, we're so worried about just making sure that we look good to our students. And frankly, some of the students have that attitude. And I'm very transparent in my classroom, or at least I try to be, that I'm not going to know everything you ask me. Honestly, it might be some little tiny thing that I knew for my CFI check ride that I've since forgotten. But there's not going to be anything you're going to ask me that I can't go find out. And in you asking me, you might learn how to find that thing out too. um I'm not perfect, and I know that, and I think if we can stop expecting everybody to be so perfect, it would create a better educational environment, whether you're in an airplane or in a classroom or where in a hangar, wherever you are.
Well, the word that popped into my head as you started talking about this was humility.
Yeah.
There's a humility to that. And there's a humility that no matter how much of an expert you are, you don't know everything. And I think of, I'm like Tai Chi masters. They'll be the first ones who they've been practicing Tai Chi for, 40 years, and they're still students. And
Yeah.
I'm a yoga instructor, one of the hats I wear. And I say that we call it a yoga practice, not a yoga achievement,
Right.
because
Well,
we're always learning and perfecting.
yeah. And my son does karate, and they score them out of 9 because 10 is considered perfect and there's no such thing. So when they do their like belt testing, they get scored out of 9 because you can't be perfect. And that you should always be striving to be a little bit better. And I was just listening to his karate instructor telling him the other day, like, I mean, the whole class, but he was like, you know what? You could be a 4th-degree black belt and world champion. And am I going to want you to be better than you are? And he's like, yeah. He's like, do it another year. And he's like, I'm not saying don't be proud of who you are. Don't be proud of what you've accomplished. You should be. Relish in that for a moment, but then go get back in the gym and go practice some more. The same thing is true in flight instructors. You could be amazing and be the best flight instructor out there with a perfect pass rate, and all your students love you, and you have the FAR-AIM memorized, and but the rules are going to change. So you're going to have to reread it, and you're going to have to stay up to date, and what new things are coming out, and what new technology exists that you didn't master beforehand. I think that's really what makes some of the best flight instructors and the best people are the ones that are constantly going out and learning new things. We used to have, when I first started here, we had a faculty member who was I'll say very senior. And he was one of my favorite people to work with because it didn't matter how long ago he was actively flying. He's like, oh, there's a new piece of technology that I should be learning. Teach me, and it was fantastic. Like, it was exactly the attitude that a good flight instructor, a good pilot, in my opinion, is always going to have, no matter what it is.
There's an article coming up in the next issue of Mentor by Joel Stoller. He's a retired airline pilot, captain, and 25,000 hours. And he just got type rated last year in the King Air because he's like, I keep on learning, like
Yeah.
when, you have somebody like that, who's just like, you have that mindset of I'm always going to learn something new. When I became a pilot in 2011, and within a couple of months, I went to my first AOPA conference. So here I am, and I'm like, this first aviation conference I've ever been to, and I'm in a room with some ForeFlight, or I don't know, some iPad, because back then ForeFlight was kind of sort of just starting out.
Right.
And I'm in this room with like 100 guys, mostly. I would probably count on one hand the number of women that were there. And let's just say they were all of a certain age. And so I was the youngest, and I was female. And they were all excited about learning this new stuff. And I'm like, wow, because a lot of times by the time people start to get gray hair, they're done, they're set in their ways. And I'm like, wow, here's like a whole like group of folks who are excited about learning new things and like technical things,
Yeah.
and so I just thought this is really cool. So I think aviation, there's an innate curiosity baked in to most people that,
Yeah.
of course, I'm sure there's plenty of people who are set in their ways and don't
Right.
want to learn new things.
Of
But
course.
you almost can't have that, not only in just general aviation or flying, but in professional flying, is particularly flight instruction.
Yeah. Absolutely. And you got to, I mean, if nothing else, you have to adapt to new students,
Right?
if
Yeah.
nothing else.
So let's talk. So that brings up a nice little segue. So tell us a little bit. How long have you been flight instructing for, Sam?
A while. So I became a flight instructor shortly after I turned 19. So talk about being in a room full of older gentlemen. When I was 19, most of my students were male. They were almost always older than me. So I guess I think that's going to put me at 17 years of flight instruction.
So what have you noticed in your 17 years of flight instruction? Because you just said students, you have different types of students too.
Oh, yeah.
But you've worked with, I'm assuming you're working with like Gen Z students. Probably earlier in your flight career, you were working with millennials, Gen X students, maybe even boomer students. I
Yeah.
mean, I hate to put labels on people, but that's just,
No, yeah, that's
there's
fair.
different ages of people have different skill sets, different attitudes. And I would imagine, having a young person, say like a 17-year-old in your cockpit, may be a very different approach than somebody who's 60.
Yeah, so my students over the last handful of years, I have probably ranged, I mean, I've done young Eagles flights, I've done summer camps, so I've done, pretty young, 8, 9, 10-year-olds. My oldest student was 82. Well, I think he was 82 when he finished. He was probably closer to 80 when we started, but a little bit older. Um, and everything in between. I've had domestic students, international students, military transferring to civilian, um, a wide range. So I'll be honest with you, I don't, from a flight instruction standpoint, most students are kind of fundamentally the same, right? Everybody's a little insecure, everybody's a little bit nervous, everybody's a little bit afraid to ask questions. Um, and you have to build that trust and rapport with each one of them. Um, Younger students tend, in my opinion, tend to be a little bit more willing to ask questions. Um, all kinds of questions. Some real young students don't know when to stop asking questions and just focus on what they need to, but which is great. Like I'd rather that be our challenge, right? Um, but older students, and I see this in myself sometimes too, like older students have a harder time being willing to admit when they don't know something. The other thing to that is I find that younger students are more willing to, this is going to be funny because my college students, I might feel a little differently about this, but younger flight students tend to be a little bit more willing to read and prepare for lessons. And older students, I think, have a harder time fitting that into their like daily life with work and families and all the other commitments that they typically have. So I think it depends on the attitude, but I've definitely had, I mean, the student that I had that was much older, he had bought his own airplane and basically was like, I need somebody to teach me how to fly this now that I bought it. And he was fantastic. He was great. I asked him to read, he read, we asked him to do practice scenarios, he did it. I mean, he was a fantastic student. Um, so everybody, I don't know that I can group everybody by age. I will say in the collegiate setting, I'm seeing a little bit more hesitation towards reading. Like I get a lot of feedback that my students would rather me just dictate what they need to know and then go home and do their quiz, and they want the majority of the learning to happen in the classroom, which just isn't how that works. And then additionally, I constantly feel like I'm reminding my students in my classroom that your learning needs to take place on the ground and your practice takes place in flight. And I think they struggle with that a little bit too. And I don't know how much of that just happens to be that they're college students. So going college full time, flight training full time, I mean, that is not a light load. So it might be more time management strategies that we really need to emphasize, which we do, but um, I think that has more to do with it than maybe generational.
I love that. Thanks for sharing that with us because
Yeah.
it just goes to show that your assumptions, my mother always used to say, assumptions make an ass out of you and me.
Yeah.
So it's good to shine some light on that. And
Yeah.
it is an individual thing. I have to say, I'm kind of shocked. I was shocked to hear, like, I mean, I was in college. I didn't expect to learn everything from my teacher and not have to study. So I was
Right.
surprised to hear that. Like, they think that they just get it by osmosis from your lecture and not have to study the material.
Well, I think that's what they want to happen. I don't
Sure.
know that's what they expect, but I think that's definitely what they would rather have happen because like, well, I spend all this time in this classroom and then I have to go back to my, dorm room and go read it again, and it's work. It takes time. And again, it comes down to time management, but that ties into my older students too, where they're balancing, work and family and other commitments. It's a time management expectation. And I think the best thing that we can do as flight instructors is set clear expectations. You know, if I'm going to spend this much time with you on the ramp or in the airplane or in the hangar or in the classroom, whatever it is, this is how much time I need you dedicating back home. This is how much time and it's going to be different for everybody because we read differently, we study differently, we grasp things differently, but some sort of kind of ballpark of what to expect, I think will help students on the front end do a little better. I mean, the more we can set clear expectations for our students, a lot easier it's going to be for them to achieve it. And that's hard for a new flight instructor because they don't know because they haven't done it yet. And that's where more senior flight instructors, I think, really need to step in and providing tools to give to our newer flight instructors to be able to help them with that.
Well, it's interesting that you're talking about time management and expectations. So when I started flight training, I knew nothing about aviation at all. I'm just like, oh, I want
Me
to learn
too.
how to fly airplanes. Woohoo.
Yeah.
So, and I read 40 hours. So in my mind, I have this like, okay, I'm going to like, solo at 20 hours and get my, do my check ride at 40 hours. Well, that was not the case. And so here I am in like my mid 30 hours and I hadn't soloed yet. I was actually, just flying. I was taking flight training part-time. I was just like flying once or twice a week because I had to, have a job to pay for. And so I started getting really discouraged because I'm like, I suck at this. I don't know what I'm doing. Why am I not like doing? And then I don't know, I did a Google search and I read that like the average is like 65 to 85 hours to get your private pilot
Right.
license. And then I was like, oh, well, first of
Yeah.
all, fill in the blank of X number of dollars per hour times 40 is different than 80. Okay.
Right.
So it's like twice as expensive as you thought. And then it's like twice as much time. And that's just flight time. That's not counting study time.
Right.
And then I ended up finally getting my check ride. It was like 91 hours. And I remember one of my instructors, because I was like all like sad and ashamed of that. And they're like, listen, hours are hours, whether or not you had an instructor in the plane with you or not for it, what does that matter?
Total time.
But I do think that you bring up a good point of just having these, whether it's in the cockpit or in the classroom and or home study, letting people know up ahead of time is helpful, not only for planning for time, but money too, actually.
Yeah.
It's your life in general. Like if you think something's going to take, 6 months and it takes a year, that's significant.
Yeah. And I think, and that's an important, like that time commitment is important. Like whenever students ask me or prospective students talk to me and they're like, well, how long is it going to take me? And I'm like, we have to have so many more questions before I can answer that for you. Like, how frequently can you commit to flying? How available can you be? How much time can you study at home? And I think that's really on the flight instructor, the flight school, depending on how those dynamics work out. It's really on them to have that really candid, clear conversation with their students when they're starting their training. I try to do exactly that with my students where I'm like, listen, the minimum's 40. The national average is 75. The more time that you study and prepare at home, the lower that number is going to be. The more frequently that you are available to fly because maintenance and weather are going to slow you down, then the smaller that number can be. If you have a flight simulator of some sort, that could help things up, especially during like your instrument rating. There's a lot of things, and I'm very honest with them. Like if you're going to take a break, or if you're not sure that you're going to be able to afford the whole private pilot all at once, or you're gonna, like, I'd rather you walk away from me for 6 months, go work, save up money, and then be able to commit more time, because in the end it will cost less money and probably take less time. So that 6 months that you're not actively flying, you know, it'll probably be a similar, check ride date, is as opposed to starting and stopping, but the dollar value will be less. So um but I'm always very clear that, like, I'll work with you however you want to, but you have to decide, you as the student, what you're comfortable with. And I just wish flight instructors did a better job of that. And I don't think that's a strength that many of us are trained to do. I mean, I've had some pretty cool flight schools that I've worked for that were really good at that. Um, and some that were not at all. So it's up to us to just keep working on it.
Well, and that brings me to sort of the next segue. You're doing so good with this, Sam. It's like
Oh, you're welcome.
we planned this or something. So the second article you wrote for NAFI's Mentor magazine was sort of exploring different types of flight training. And also, so I want to touch on this article a little bit, and I also want to share with our listeners sort of a little bit about kind of like how the sausage is made. So Sam sends me this article last year.
Yeah.
And it was titled From Trade (parentheses Flight School) to Collegiate Aviation Program, Flight Path to Flight Training. So that's
Yeah.
the title. So this article is about different types of flight training. So you guys don't, I think like the most challenging part of articles is dialing in a title. How many times we go back and forth with this title? And so of course, the title that ran in the magazine was School of Thought,
Yeah.
Exploring Vocational and Collegiate Flight Training.
Yeah.
So titles are all about like tightening it up in the fewest amount of words to say exactly what it is, and is also potentially catchy.
Yeah.
So in this article, you explored that because when you trained through what we called a trade school type program, and now
Yeah.
you teach in a collegiate education environment. So you see both sides of that equation. And also one thing I want to talk about is your mentor and colleague, Joe Clark.
Yeah.
So Joe Clark is also a mentor author. He wrote the cover article for the November-December issue 2023. Joe is also founder and owner of Blue Water Press, which is an aviation publishing house. And he's a colleague and mentor of Sam's.
Yeah.
And so he encouraged her to do this type of writing. So again, there's these touch points of encouragement and mentoring. So another reason Sam is writing for us, not just Carolina, but also Joe, encouraged her, hey, you can do this.
Yeah.
You even thanked him at the beginning of your article. So tell us a little bit about why you decided to write that article that explored vocational and collegiate flight training.
So, okay, so a couple of reasons. I think ultimately I wrote it because I was chit-chatting with Joe about it in my office. He's technically retired from Riddle now, but he fails at it and we keep bringing him back as an adjunct. But
Fails at retirement.
yeah, and so I joke that he fails at retirement because he can't actually leave. But we were chit-chatting just about my experience and the different like types of flight instruction worlds I've been a part of, and I told him that one of my research areas that I really want to focus on is how to kind of leverage some of the wonderful things about a trade-based flight school with a little bit more freedoms, a little bit more levity, a little bit more ability to grow as flight instructors that I think is a little harder in the collegiate world, but also which but also bringing in the whys and the hows and the more substantial aspects that you get in a more academic environment like a university. And like I said, man, if we could just find a way to mix the best of both worlds, that would be fantastic. And Riddle does a pretty decent job of that, but it's a really big program, and so they have to have a lot of limitations and rules set in place, which is great. Um, but for a more experienced flight instructor, it's limiting. It just is because it's designed for more inexperienced flight instructors to work through those processes. Um, and so I was talking about that specifically, how we could leverage the best of both worlds. And I started telling him about some of my background and the things that I liked and disliked about each. Um, and then I was also telling him that I constantly get students in my office and they're like, you're going to be honest with me, right? What is the best way to get your pilot certificates? And I'm like, the best way is the best way for you. And that could be a trade school, it could be college, it could be military, it could be this, it could be that. And I get asked like, well, should I buy my own airplane or should I rent it? Or should I do this? Or should I fly this? And I like, there's no one size fits all. There never will be in my belief system. And so, and I think we're all very different creatures, going back to what we talked about before. Everybody's a little bit different. And what you're willing to invest into your education is going to be a little different, and your situational needs. And so you have to find the path that works for you. And so that article for me was really just talking about what the strengths and weaknesses were when I was in both environments, and kind of what they did to mold me into the person that I am, and the flight instructor that I am. And so yeah, I mean, that article really came from just me chit-chatting with Joe about all of those things. And he's like, why haven't you written that down? Write it down right now. You need to write more. And I was like, okay, Joe. And it was funny because he'd probably told me to write it 3 or 4 times. Joe is actually helping me get my tail wheel right endorsement as well in his champ. And I need to go finish that. We got one more flight. But it was probably after that flight, and he was like, you have to go finish this. And I was like, okay. And one day I was working on my dissertation and I sat down at a coffee shop, and there was no part of me that wanted to work on my dissertation that day. And I wrote the article. Like it just fell out of me, just pure procrastination on writing what I was supposed to be writing. And so I wrote the whole thing. I gave it a day. I read over it, made some tweaks, sent it off to Joe for him to review it, and then I sent it to you. So
I love it. I love it. Like usually when people have writer's block, they don't write. So you had like dissertation block that like it's just like your dissertation block was NAFI's gain.
yeah.
I love that. Well, I thank you for sharing that process, Sam. And I think I want to touch on a few points that you bring up for our listeners. We have ideas rattling around in our head, and they can rattle around in our head for months or even years, maybe
Yeah.
even decades. I'm going to raise my hand there. And sometimes it's a combination of it just has to sort of ripen and sort of ferment a little bit and sort of kind of get its flavor developed. And sometimes it takes somebody kind of kicking in the butt like multiple times or 100 times. Sometimes it's a combination of all of those things. And then just a perfect storm of, and then it comes out. Other people, again, like you said, flight instruction, everyone has a different process. But I think this illustrates highlights the importance of mentors, of encouragement, of the role of procrastination, the just knowing you're going to eventually do it, like kind of with your tail wheel, you're like, all right, I know I'm almost there. I'm going to do it. So it's okay if things are unfinished and in the works. Just eventually when you get it out into the world. And I just want to highlight that because I know there's a lot of people listening right now that are thinking, I've been thinking about submitting this or writing about this for a long time, but they haven't quite done it yet. And so just sharing your process and all of us sharing our process is, kind of like, we watch a monkey do it and then, okay, maybe we could do it too. So thanks for sharing that with us. I'd like, as we wrap up our conversation here, Sam, I would like to talk a little bit about NAFI Summit 2024, which this year is actually happening at Embry-Riddle. So last year it was in Lakeland at the Sun and Fun campus.
Yeah.
This year it's again in Florida, but it's at the Embry-Riddle campus. So tell us a little bit about your involvement this year and what's going on and why people should be excited about it and go.
Okay, so I've got lots of good things. So same involvement as last year. I'm still kind of the person that's keeping track of all the documentation, the logistical stuff. I mean, I don't know. They give me probably more credit than I deserve sometimes, but I am doing a lot of the just making sure that like the hotels are booked and I'm ordering catering and I'm making sure that we have, all the things that we need for the event space and coordinating with Riddle to get all of that done. We have our schedule set. So that's going to get posted to the website, I think, within the next couple of days. We've got some really good speakers. We've got some really great keynotes. So we've got lots of great things that are happening. We've got some good food and some really, I think the speakers are going to be really great. All of our Embry-Riddle flight instructors get to attend all the presentations for free. And then the Kings are going to be here again, which is exciting. I think they're going to speak at dinner again, I'm pretty sure, which will be great. We already have a location set up for 2025, which will be announced at Summit. We actually already have a whole bunch of that planned already, which is really exciting because I think the planning has been a bit of a learning curve with figuring out what questions we need to be asking to make sure we're fully prepared. And I think we're really starting to iron out those questions a little better. We're going to have some really great exhibitors. We're going to have raffles and giveaways. I know at least one handheld radio and some other things. And then, just a great opportunity for networking. I mean, I was looking through the data of the survey like after the event last year, and a lot of the things that people just really enjoyed was getting to see colleagues from other part of the country, getting to meet other flight instructors that are in similar phases as them, and again, just learning something outside of their flight school or their experience and kind of trying to bring that back to their part of the world. I will say that we are leaving Florida for 2025. finally. I know that was a big ask by a lot of people, so we will be leaving Florida next year. But 2024, I mean, is shaping up to be pretty fantastic. I'm excited about it. I think we're going to have a lot of fun. I think it's going to be a lot of really cool ideas shared. Um, yeah.
Well, awesome. Well, last year, whenever you do something for the first time, there's just, you don't know what you don't know. And there's such a steep learning curve. And even with all that, it just exceeded expectations. And everyone was like, you have to do this again. And so to hear as you roll into the second summit that like you're got a lot of those I's dotted and T's crossed, and it just shows that there's so much demand and people wanting this, they're hungry for this information.
Well, yeah, and that was something we actually purposefully didn't plan 2024 prior to 2023 happening because we weren't sure there was going to be a 2024. We had to make sure that this was an event that we were comfortable planning again. It was an event that the NAFI membership really wanted to see again. And you're right, after the first one, everybody was like, we have to do, like, so when is the next one? And we were like, give us a minute. We'll get it, we promise. It went, I mean, again, my project manager hat, it went about as well as we could have asked for it to go. We were really surprised. It was nice because people would stop me and they're like, wow, like nothing's gone wrong. And I'm like, I'm so glad you feel that way. Like, yes, that means I am hiding it wonderfully. So, which nothing really major went wrong, but I mean, we had hiccups here and there, but they were honestly pretty minor. So obviously not big enough that anybody noticed. So that's all that matters.
Well, and of course I wrote, so in the September, October issue of Mentor, which will be out relatively in the near future.
Yeah.
I wrote an article for that about the Professional Development Center at AirVenture and all the volunteers and all of the logistics and all the behind scenes stuff. And actually, in a previous life, I worked as a catering and banquet manager in food and beverage. And so I have some idea of what it's like to pull off an event there's so many details. And those details nobody sees unless something goes wrong, of course, then you notice them, but it's just, right. And you said earlier that I think they gave me more credit than I deserve. No, we probably don't. We do. You're getting all you deserve, Sam, because there's so many details. And it's not just the chairs and the food and the hotels. It's the speakers and the quality of the speakers and how that all, the vendors and the networking, and there's so many different things. So like really the success of Summit, I know so many people are involved. It was never any one person, but we thank you so much for what you've done and what you continue to do, and very deserving of the Eggspuehler Award. And we are eternally grateful. Sometimes it just takes a key person to kind of run with that ball. And we're so grateful for you that you've done that for us.
Thanks. Well, I'm proud of it. It's hanging up right here behind me. So on my wall.
Awesome. Yay.
Yeah.
Well, Sam, it's just been a joy chatting with you. Your I hate to use the word passion because it's sort of a cliche, but your enthusiasm and your dedication and just your commitment to aviation and education it just shines through in everything that you do. And there's just this joyful exuberance and eagerness about you, and it's really infectious. And so, more people like you in this industry is only just going to keep lifting it up. So thank you so much for all that you do. And thanks for being here on the podcast. It's been
Thanks for inviting me. This is fun.
Well, everybody, thank you so much for joining us on the Writers Behind the Stories. Be sure to join us next time. Like, subscribe, and leave your comments. I invite you to consider sharing your stories, and see you next time on the Writers Behind the Stories on NAFI Writer